Well, hey, happy Wednesday, everybody. It is hard to believe, Ken, but it is March 1st. We are
It
technically
is.
into a new month on Level Up.
Yeah. 1/6 of the year's gone already, and I almost missed it.
Isn't that how things go? And I think especially, Ken, as the older we get, not casting stones at you, but personally myself, right? It's like I'm in a time machine that I want to get out of in a hurry. But the world is changing, right? Every single day. And that's one of the things that we try and do in the show is to bring people up to speed on what some of those changes are and to bring in experts that can help guide us through some of those changes as well. And before we get started, though, just to let everyone know, please, as we're moving through here today, leave your comments and questions. It's nice to hear what you're saying. We'll put them up. It doesn't matter if they're good, bad, or indifferent. That's the one things I love about live streams. And Ken, one of your favorite things, what do you like to tell people to do?
I always want to know where they're watching from because we have people that join us globally, and it is always a treat to say hi to our friends from the UAE or from France or from wherever they are, including those in Canada. Eh?
Yeah, that's right. They let us in. I don't know if you caught my thing with Greg Walters. We did a Chat GPT thing about a week ago. And one of the things that I actually put into ChatGPT, because it was actually Jeff Bendix from Bendix Imaging who requested it. He said, write, some kind of thing about the death of printers and copiers in the voice of Wes McDonald. And I said, well, I don't think I'm that popular. I don't think ChatGPT is going to know me too well. But what about the voice of Bob and Doug McKenzie? So if you haven't checked that out, head over to Greg Walters' page on LinkedIn or his blog, and you can hear me talking as a Canadian about the death of the space. Morning, guys. Speaking of Greg Walters, speak of the devil.
Good morning, Greg. And he hasn't told us where he's from, but I know he hasn't gone back to Michigan. It's still too cold and slick up there, so he'll be in Florida.
Yeah. And hey, look, hey, Denise, how are you? Good to see you in South Carolina. I certainly wish I was there right now. We've had some fun weather up here in the great Canadian White North. And between snowstorms and ice storms, nothing is normal. So the world is definitely changing. Greg Walters says he's experiencing a beautiful 88 degrees. Oh, well, I was just in Florida a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not feeling too bad. Well, that's great. And I guess, Ken, without further ado, maybe you can introduce our guest today. I'll talk about the term first. I'm just going to throw it out there so everyone can digest it. I just love it. It's not the metaverse. It is the Officeverse. Without further ado, Ken, introduce our guest.
Yes, and so we have with us Bob Johansen, and he's in a think tank where they look at and think about the future. He's going to tell us more about what they see coming. So welcome to the show, Bob.
Great. Thanks, Ed, and thanks, West. I'm Bob Johansen. I'm based at Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley. We're the longest running futures think tank in the world now. We were a spinoff of Rand in 1968. So the first question you should always ask a futurist is, have you outlived your forecasts? And we have 5 times over.
Well, you must be doing it right then for you to be still in the business of as a think tank, because if you're not doing a good job, it'd be hard to sustain that. So tell us, how did you get started in the think tank business?
So I did my PhD at Northwestern, and I was there with an interest in the future of religion and the future of spirituality. And as I was there thinking I was going to be a professor, the internet started, the ARPANET first. And I kind of grew up with the ARPANET and then the internet, thinking about the human and the social organizational impacts of tech. I got to go to Silicon Valley early, and I've kind of grown up with Silicon Valley, and got really interested in this idea of thinking future back. So many of us are stuck in the now, this kind of noisy now. And if you can learn to think future back, we like to go at least 10 years out and think future back. You get a much more clear idea of where we're going. And our new book, Office Shock, is basically looking future back at the future of how we work, how, when, why, where we work, and thinking future back. The COVID crisis gave us a chance to restart, to reimagine, to think differently about how we work and where and when and even why. So this is a very positive book looking future back at how we work.
That is so interesting because I'm a fan of that concept of looking future back. We were talking a little bit before the show, but I think that businesses that don't think about where they're going to be in 5 or 10 years and then work backwards to create the map to get there are going to wind up in places that they may not be real happy with.
Yeah, that's for sure. Particularly now, I think this next decade, particularly with issues like climate, or I teach at the Army War College. I'm not a military guy, but I happen to be at the Army War College, the graduate school for the generals, the week before 9/11. And I've been invited to teach there. They now read my books, and I meet with the new 3-star generals on their first week in Washington. And you can see this pressure in Washington right now. It's such a polarized, present-oriented place, and it's such a noisy present that if you think future back, you can develop clarity, what the Army calls commander's intent or mission command, what I call in my books clarity of direction, but flexibility of execution. You can have clarity. You can't have certainty.
Yeah. And I love that. So let's go back to this term. Well, actually, I want to go back. Where did you come up with, or is there more behind the idea of this term Officeverse, or did we cover all that?
There's a lot behind it. When we were writing the book, we began it in the early stage of the COVID crisis, and we were approached by a large furniture company in Switzerland, USM, very innovative furniture company. And they asked us to write a book, a public book. All of this has been public, to start a new conversation about the future of the office. And that's what began. So we were looking at the time and place options, same time, same place, different times, different places, and figuring out what's this kind of archipelago of possibility if you think future back. And at the time we were writing, the term metaverse in Silicon Valley was kind of everywhere. And one company in particular was trying to own it. That won't succeed in the long run, but it just made the conversation so noisy that we decided to coin a new term. Institute for the Future, you're seeing some things from here now. We're the longest running futures think tank in the world, and we do public training for people, and we try to restart the conversation, change the register is the term we're doing now, change the ways we talk about things. And this was one aspect of that. How might the office change? So we coined the term the Officeverse, but you can use variations. We work with retail a lot. We work with Walmart a lot. When I talk to their CEO, I use the term retailverse. We work with United Way. When I talk to Angela Williams, their CEO, I use the term communityverse. We work with WestRock, the world's largest paper company. When I work with them, I use the term factoryverse. So it's really rethinking, kind of changing the register on how we think about where, when, and even why we work.
Yeah, I would think that the things that happened with COVID and the sudden unexpected changes would make people more open to this, to realizing that they need to rethink what we're doing, because in COVID they had to really think about it.
They sure did. And Greg Walters is pitching in here. I wonder if, I like kind of the way he's phrased this, right? But if there's any similar shift that you've seen in the past that, kind of reflects the current level of evolution, because if we don't understand our past, we don't understand our future, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a great question. Thanks, Greg. So when we think 10 years ahead, we always look at least 50 years back. So we think in 60-year swaths of time, depending on the topic. We did a study recently on green health. We actually looked 200 years back when we did that, because green health is such an old concept. If you think about AI, that artificial intelligence is a current term that was coined in 1956. So it's taken a very long time to be an overnight success with things like Chat GPT. So we always do that. What's if you think about climate, let me take that as an example. The shift in climate, we did our first study on climate shifts in 1977. So it's been a very long time, but it took a long time for us to realize it. Up on the wall here now, you see our chatbot that was just released for Office Shock. Feel free to try it out. It's a prototype, kind of like ChatGPT, but it's specifically for the new book, Office Shock. And I really love some of the answers we're getting. And it was interesting. One of my favorite answers that was submitted and sent to me by another author, the question was, where will be the place for people in the AI future? Will there be a place for people in the AI future? And here's the answer that our chatbot gave, which isn't really quite like the way I talk, but it's similar, and it's generative AI. AI will not replace humans, but rather will extend human capabilities and help humans solve the world's wicked problems. Humans and machines will collaborate to create better futures for working and living, and the humans will be able to reclaim AI from big tech's control. Now, that's something I never said, but the chatbot did. So I think that's an example of something that's been around for a long time. The climate issue has been around a long time, but we're imagining it differently now. We're imagining climate on a global scale with an urgency we didn't have before. We're imagining AI as more conversational, more practical than it's ever been. And in the book, we argue the term artificial intelligence was really very unfortunate. And we use the term augmented intelligence because that's where the power is going to be. It's going to be people and machines doing things together that have never been done before.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about the term AI and how far back it goes. West had to stop at Petty's dog.
Right. I love it.
But growing up, I was a huge science fiction fan, and some of the things we see today remind me of things. A good example was Robert Heinlein wrote a book, "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress,"
right.
about the challenges Microsoft had with Bing. All of a sudden, reminded me of that a little bit. But it was about a sense of computer intelligence that developed its own personality and way of doing things, and so we see these changes that are coming. What do you think these are going to have? What impact on the nature of work? Over the next, let's say, over the next decade.
So this is really cool. What West is doing is asking the chatbot at the same time you're asking me. So let's see what the chatbot says first, and then we'll respond to that. It's interesting in the chatbot responses, you'll see they're kind of generic, and I don't always agree with what the chatbot says, but that's the knowledge base it's working from. So here it's saying in the next 10 years, we will see a shift from fixed offices and specialized jobs to shape-shifting, that's my word, ways of working, and augmented generalists. That's another term we use. Technology, places, and people will converge to create a great opportunity for deep change in offices and officing. Offices is the place, officing is the process. Offices are the noun, officing is a verb, with a focus on climate impacts, diversity, and augmentation of intelligence. So we have in the book 7 spectrums of choice, beginning with purpose, where so many people in this shutdown have said, well, when do we go back to the office? And we say, that's a good question, but for us, it's number 6 out of 7. And the first question is, why an office at all? What's the purpose? Then what are the outcomes? The biggest outcome is around climate. Then who do you want to office with? What's the culture of belonging? How do you want to augment? What's the place-time spread from buildings to the Officeverse? And finally, how do you create a climate of agility where it's not a fixed structure, it's a variable structure? And here, the military is ahead of us in business in terms of doing this, particularly the special forces part of the Army. But they have these very flexible organizational structures. One of my big surprises was the best militaries in the world are no longer command and control. That just doesn't work anymore in this kind of world. You have to be very flexible about direction, very, very fluid, or very clear about direction, very flexible about execution.
I like Greg Walters. He inserted a little humor here. So If we're working with SpaceX, it would be the universe.
Nice. I love it, Greg. Yes, great. That's a
Oh,
good.
well, that was really interesting. And as you know, I'm a big fan of using artificial intelligence in the creative process. And just before the interview, I mean, you mentioned that you've written, obviously over a dozen books. So you are a creative yourself, a writer. And certainly as a writer myself and as a producer, this augmentation that it brings us, I think, is going to be very powerful. So very cool to see that you've actually built, a chatbot into your, using the stuff from your book already.
Yeah, that's been my challenge here. So when I wrote the chapter on the spectrum of augmentation, and I should say I wrote this book with an architect, Joseph Press, and with an information systems professor, Christine Bullen. And it looks like somebody can't hear now. So maybe I hope I can hear. So I hope everybody else can hear now.
I think so. We've had feedback from other guests. So Bill, he can't hear us. So we'll create a little banner that says,
okay, so what we did was use ChatGPT-3 to write the chapter on the spectrum of augmentation. And it was particularly good at helping us develop these 7 spectrums of choice to kind of expand our thinking. And then it actually ended up writing a really interesting poem at the end that we ended up putting into the close of the chapter that talks about how to engage. And the challenge, this is my 13th book. If I'm going to write big time books 10 years from now, I'm going to have to be augmented. So what I'm struggling for, and this is my study. When before COVID, I was on stage all the time. Now my metaphor is inviting people into my study, and VR headsets on the wall if people want to shift in this. Everything has a story. I've got cameras, microphones, a green screen. I can do things that I couldn't do when I was on stage. And I'm going to have augmentation to be able to write the way that I want to write. So my next step beyond the Office Shock chat book is to create a chat book of all 13 of my books. And then basically pulling together the things that I've said over the years and then link it to the history of the Institute. Since we are the longest running futures think tank, we're usually right. We actually keep track. So 60 to 80% of our forecasted futures have actually happened. But it turns out that's not the way to evaluate a futurist. That's the way to evaluate a fortune teller. We don't even use the word prediction at the Institute. Rather, the way you evaluate us is, does our foresight provoke your insight? It doesn't really matter if you agree with our forecast. Does it provoke your insight that leads to better decisions in the present? So that's the way I get evaluated by the CEOs I work with, is does our foresight provoke their insight that leads to better decisions?
I love it. And this idea of augmentation, right? It's funny because when we think of augmented reality or augmented humans, right? If a term like cyborgs or whatever, we always tend to go to kind of the extremes. But when I think about things, right? Like one of the biggest augmentations in human history was the wheel, right? Like the ability for us to move faster than we can walk or run, right? And that has had huge benefits for the human race, not necessarily for the planet, but certainly for a lot of the human race, right? That augmentation usually, when these things happen, it's because it's going to be some kind of great benefit to it, right? And I feel that with the Officeverse and these other changes that are coming, that's really what it's bringing, along with obviously some of the pain of change, that we're going to see a bright future.
Yeah, no, you're right, West. And, the subtitle for the Office Shock book is Creating Better Futures for Working and Living. So we have the opportunity to reimagine. And Ed, you were referring to science fiction. We're also believers in that. In the book, we draw from the Foundation trilogy. And we talk about the concept of the mule that Isaac Asimov talked about. And the mule was a disruption that changed everything, that broke into the predictive models of the Foundation. COVID-19 was that kind of disruption that just stopped everything and made things that we thought were impossible, it made them possible. So, for example, during the COVID lockdown, office workers with very little preparation and almost no training, office workers were really quite productive without offices.
Yeah.
That's really remarkable.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm a big fan of, WFA or work from anywhere, right? And
Mhm.
I've been doing it myself for probably close to 20 years now. It
Mhm.
was kind of a happy accident the first time that it happened. But to see this explosion of technologies for us to be able to see each other and work with each other in these kind of virtual, ways, right? I remember a time when people were very reticent to have their camera on when they were actually speaking with people through these kind of chats. But I think that is normalized, that people have come to realize that there's kind of a power in that thing that we talk about when we think of culture, right? That there are ways for us, although imperfect, to be able to still generate some culture even when remote, right? That we're in this. I don't know what you would call that, the remotiverse or something, right? But not all is lost. Hey, I wonder if you can tell us, and respect for your time, how do you see the nature of work changing over the next, decade, and maybe in some of the more powerful ways you see it happening?
Um, I think it's going to become obviously more flexible. So these fundamental choices of what's your purpose, there's going to be more of a purpose orientation to work. And interesting, again, during the COVID shutdown, the Blue Zones Project did this really interesting study on the value of purpose. And in that case, what they found was purpose-driven people are happier, they're healthier, and they live up to 7 years longer. Purpose-driven people who work for purpose-driven organizations are happier, healthier, they live up to 14 years longer, and the organizations perform better. So the notion of purpose and the notion of meaning in work is going to become front and center because now there are so many more options. So that's a big shift. Purpose and meaning are going to be at the top of the thought for individuals, for organizations, and for communities. Secondly, this whole flexibility of the Officeverse of where, when, how we work, that's going to be so much more powerful. And in the book, we look 50 years back at technology, and you can see how long it took. People think that the kind of tools we use now, like Zoom or Teams or WebEx, we think they're sort of new technologies. They're actually very old. They started in the 70s and 80s. They were pretty awful when they started, but they're pretty good now. 10 years from now, they're going to be dramatically better. So we're in a better position to have great flexibility in just how we go about working. The third thing that's going to be different is we're going to be a gamer's culture that's going to be inspired by young people. So I'm really optimistic about young people growing up with gaming if they have hope. And again, the military's ahead of us. They call it wargaming. I call it voluntary fear exposure. What we think of as video gaming today, 10 years from now, we're going to think of as the most powerful learning medium in history. And the kids are going to have a competitive advantage with it. So cross-generational mentoring is one of the most powerful things you can do right now. And, if you're older, we define digital natives as 27 or less. And we define the cross-reality natives as 17 or less. So if you're more than 27, you're a digital immigrant. We have license to play the wisdom game. So there's something we can offer, but the kids have a competitive advantage against us. And they're going to leapfrog us in many ways. So that, again, is a fundamental shift. The young people are going to bring the inspiration, again, if they have hope. If they don't, the downside of this is that they are challenged with depression, suicide, simplistic thinking. Those are real risks. And I'm a PhD in sociology, so I'm kind of trained in studying social groups. Unfortunately, my sociology and social science colleagues have studied more the negative side of tech than they have the positive side with kids. It turns out both are real. It's a very real tension. These media are very threatening and they are very hopeful, but we've got a lot more data on the problems of tech than we do about the hope.
It looks like Greg Walters here have been saying that about gamers for decades, and I really like the cross mentoring verse.
Nice.
As Greg said, young people always bring change, and yeah, and they do. And I was going to say that young minds also bring change, right? And it
Yeah.
certainly strikes me, Bob, that you have a very young mind. I certainly did not expect to see a chatbot, created and introduced along with the book, right? So young people, young minds, let's do it.
Yeah, and I used to run the institute, and when I asked our board if I could go back to doing what I love to do, which was write books and do things like this, do custom forecasts, and I love you have your dog there. Our latest custom forecast was actually for Hill's Pet Science about the future of connected pets. And what if our pets could actually tell us what they need better through a kind of sensory engagement? But anyway, that's just a quick aside. But
And just having a little fun here with some AI. So I actually did input into DALL-E 2.
oh, nice.
Basically, a digital immigrant next to a digital native with reference to those born before and after the internet. And I find it interesting that the software created an image where the young person's head is actually in a screen.
Nice. That's really nice. That's really nice. So if you go, West, if you go on the officeshot.org website and pull up the image we created with Midjourney on the spectrum of time and place, just while we're talking, that'll give you another sense. We recruited young artists from around the world to come up with visualizations of these 7 spectrums of choice. And they came up with fantastic things, and they're in the book. Book came out in paperback right away, and there's an insert, a color insert.
Oh yeah,
these graphics right here,
wow.
And then the 7 spectrums of choice are like a music mixing board metaphor. But those are all on the officeshot.org website. You don't even have to buy the book to get them. But the PowerPoints are on there too if you want to use any of the images. But we were disappointed in the human artist image of the Officeverse. So my colleague Joseph, who's an architect and an artist himself, worked with Midjourney to create this image of an Officeverse where you could flow easily into the office and the in-person kind of meetings.
I love it. Just embracing, like you said, if we're looking towards the future, embracing some of those things that are, going to have a dramatic impact on that future, right?
Yeah, just so, get it out.
Let me get this last question in, because this is, and Wes just popped it up. I think this is key for our audience too, is what should the business leaders today start doing to prepare for this Officeverse future? Because I'm a believer, if you don't prepare for the future, it's a bad thing. So what should business leaders be thinking about and doing today?
That's right. So you can look on the Office Shop website for the details. I did 3 books on this topic. The first one was about skills, and there's 10 future leadership skills. It's called Leaders Make the Future. The second was the new leadership literacies, 5 literacies. The third was the mindset of what I call full spectrum thinking. So what leaders can do now, just in summary, is to learn how to think future back, not just present forward, because future back gives you that source of clarity and also teaches you the dangers of certainty. The second thing you can do is develop that ability to see the signals all around you. We're inspired constantly by the quote from William Gibson, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." So those are what we call signals, and they're all around us. And you can see right here, future back, sort of what, and we say most people think now, next, future, horizon 1, horizon 2, horizon 3. We just reverse the order. So it's future and then next, and then now. That gives you that fresh point of view. And you've got to learn to think full spectrum, across spectrums of possibility, not just categorical thinking, not just binary thinking in particular. And the great news is the digital tools for this are getting dramatically better. So we're shifting gradually from binary computing, the ultimate categories, zeros or ones, toward quantum, with things like blockchain along the way, and stuff like crypto is kind of crazy wildcard spin-offs of that along the way toward blockchain. But that move toward full spectrum thinking is just so critical. So that's the last thing I'd leave you with. Leaders have to be very clear about direction, very flexible about execution.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that we talk about all the time as well, right? Is that that idea of purpose? What is the purpose of what you're trying to do with your organization in the first place? And it's something I think that people often miss. So really great perspective. I love that. First of all, starting with what future, right? And then only coming back at the end to what now. I think it's a really neat direction. And listen, in respect for your time and our viewers, we are at the bottom of the half hour, and I cannot thank you enough, Bob, for joining us today. It's been really exciting, and certainly encourage people to look out for your book. I do have, I'll just share it up here. 1 second before we go, and that folks can actually find it at various outlets: Penguin, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and bookshop.org as well. And make sure that you visit officeshock.org, for more information on not just the book, but on what you're doing for futurism in general. So, Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoyed the conversation.
Yep. Thanks. We appreciate it a lot.
Cheers.
And Greg Walters says, great job, and one of the best level up ever. Could talk for hours. Yeah, Greg, the near future.
Thank you, Greg.
Certainly recommend you guys get connected up on LinkedIn or otherwise. And
thank you, Greg.
Yeah. And for everyone else out there, until next time, keep learning. And what else, Ken?
We need to keep leveling up.
All right. See you, folks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.